Good morning and welcome to Roadmap MBA. My name is Ashleigh King and I'm a guest presenter on this fantastic YouTube channel. So if you haven't heard of the Roadmap MBA before, it is a brilliant resource which is now all over the world, over 30 countries and growing every day. So this is a resource that is to make business education more accessible. And so if you'd like to find out more, please look at the links in the description. But I'm really delighted to be part of the presenting team, which is getting bigger too. So I have a colleague joining soon. His name is Ifeanyi Tony. He's from Nigeria, and I'm really excited because we both did our Masters in Business Administration at Newcastle University Business School, and I know he's going to bring so much interesting content and just a different perspective to what myself as Steve Pugh, the founder of Roadmap MBA, bring. So I'm really excited about that. So welcome if you're here and you're watching. Please leave a comment, let us know that you're here. We'd love to see you. It's been great to present recently and see who's watching, see different names pop up from all over the world that I remember and recall from different things. So do say hi, and it's really nice to see people watching. So I'm going to share a little bit about a really cool topic called Neurolinguistic Programming. Before I do, I just wanted to say a little bit about me, super quick if you've not come across me or we haven't met before. My name is Ashleigh King. I call myself a creative entrepreneur. That's really important to me. I'm also a podcaster. So I have a podcast called Nurture Your Zest, which is all about overcoming adversity, the prickly situations we go through in life, how through courage, creativity and curiosity you can find inspiration to nurture your zest. And so I started that podcast in 2019 and it's grown and grown. I now teach people the podcast, which I love. I produce podcasts for people, for companies. So I've got 2 podcast series launching this Thursday, which is so exciting. And on top of that, I have a podcast studio in the Oosburn called Flamingo Heights. And that's in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK. So that's a little bit about me. What I also am, and one of the reasons I chose this topic is I am a NLP, so Neuro-Linguistic Programming Master Practitioner. I also have Master Practitioner in Personal Evolutionary Coaching, Hypnotherapy, and also Timeline Resourcing. Those are with the Tailored Life Company. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my qualifications later relating to NLP and why I chose to do them. But that's a bit of info about me. So if you want to say hi, it would be so lovely to see you. Really nice to see you here today, Neil. It's really great that you're here. Thanks for being here. And if you have any questions about NLP, please do share them today. Okay, so what will I be talking about today? So, first of all, what on earth is neurolinguistic programming? What does it mean? And some of the history around it and the origins, some of the basic principles of NLP, the power of language and how we can use it to help us. My motivations for personally studying an NLP qualification and how it also, came about in my life, but it might surprise you why I studied them, so I thought I would share them. I also wanted to share my experience of studying my NLP qualifications and then my thoughts on ethics and controversy around NLP. So this is my perspective. Other people will have a different point of view, and that's why it's so important. If you do think something or you have questions, do drop a note in the comments. We love to get questions and it means we can help you here and there. So that's brilliant. Okay, so it's really nice to be here. Why did I choose this topic? Well, each time I plan and prepare for the Roadmap MBA sessions I deliver, we're fortunate I can talk about whatever I want, but I also like to try and think about things that are going on in my life that are relevant to what I'm doing. So why would an NLP course be relevant to people who are interested in business education or wanting to do a Master's in Business Administration, an MBA? Well, actually, the job market, as we know, is very good for people wanting to get jobs at the moment. There are lots of roles out there. At the same time, it is very competitive. So having a knowledge of NLP language patterns or just a base understanding of it can help you if you're in an interview situation where you might get questions that have an NLP underlying background in them. It could be that actually you'll be able to present yourself better. NLP is sometimes called the science of communication. So it is a way that you can present and communicate yourself better. So those things can actually really come in handy, and that's one of the reasons why I thought it might be relevant to this audience of people who are interested in learning about business and personal development. Okay, so what is neurolinguistic programming? What is it? Why does it matter? Okay, so neurolinguistic programming, NLP, is not the same thing as natural language processing. So it's the same acronym. Natural language processing is an acronym that people use to explain when computers communicate with humans in their own language. So you might have seen that when we do speech to text recognition, when you have your computer play something to you that was text in a voice that you've chosen your favorite accent. Those are some examples of natural language processing. There are links between the linguistic and programming. There's links between the two disciplines. I don't know why they have the same acronym, but it is really important to separate those two concepts. So what we're talking about today is not natural language processing. We're looking at neurolinguistic programming. So the neuro is to do with your brain. It's to do with thinking about your brain and the kind of unconscious mind, what might be going on there that you're not aware of. It's the language that we use that can be so powerful in our day-to-day life. And it's also how we can reprogram and reframe those pieces of language to use them to help us be the best versions of ourselves. So John Grinder, who's one of the founders of NLP, talks about the science of personal excellence. It also can be called the science of communication. So neurolinguistic programming is about patterns, and it's about creating patterns that help you to reach outcomes. Now, one of the things that happens with neurolinguistic programming is there's this idea that no one person is actually broken. We are not broken. What happens is we can become unresourceful. And so there are no broken people. We just become unresourceful, and we're in unresourceful states. So that's a really helpful concept, because if you're going through something that you're struggling with in your life and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this happened to me and then that happened to me and it was really difficult and I'm stuck because I have this label and I have this thing that I'm holding on to. What NLP says is actually you're not broken. You may have some challenges that have made you unresourceful or some circumstances that have been difficult, but you can actually reprogram your mind and reprogram your circumstances to make things better. So it can be a really powerful thing, and a lot of people get really hooked and excited about the about the opportunities with NLP. I know I have been that way too. Richard Bandler is another founder of NLP, and he talks about an attitude and a methodology which leaves behind a trail of techniques. So those are two examples of what NLP is from the people who created NLP. But if you have ever done an NLP course, or if you have any thoughts about NLP, I'd love to hear them in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts from the outside in. What is NLP? I know for me, when I first heard of the term, I thought it was some kind of really pseudoscience, kind of psychobabble, didn't really know what it was, wasn't really sure and knew anything about it really. So actually learning about it, which I started to do in February this year, has been really an interesting journey for me, and I'd love to hear if anyone else has done those qualifications. Please share them in the comments, because I'd love to hear your journey with it too. Okay, so when we talk about neurolinguistic programming, we actually have 11 million bits per second of information coming to us. So we call it BPS. So when you have a thought process, every second you're getting 11 million bits per second, but actually we filter all of that down to 126 bits per second. So that's a huge amount of data that we're just dumping and getting rid of. So what we do is we delete, we distort, and we generalize, and our brains do that for us. And they do that for us through a set of pre-programmed patterns that we all have. So this will be influenced by your value system, by something called meta models, so models that you already have of thinking, of your beliefs. It could be around your representational systems, which will be to do with the things you can see, so your visual representation styles, your auditory, so what you can hear, your feelings, so your kinesthetic feelings, your olfactory, so what you can smell, and your gustatory, what you can taste. So it's linked with the 5 senses, and what happens is we get all of this information coming in, and we just process it so quickly based on our own values. And so this is why we can look into things like unconscious bias. If you look at maybe meeting people and wanting to get to know someone, but then maybe you don't want to judge them, that sometimes we can judge without thinking because we have things inside our unconscious mind that we haven't really fully thought about. And so you might have people talking about they don't like someone because they have a vibration or they have a feeling. That will be a kinesthetic response to something that they've sensed. This is why we pick up so much information when we connect with people, particularly around body language. So although NLP is often around hypnotic language patterns and language patterns in general, there's so many other things that you look at, like body language and tiny physical responses to stimuli. Okay, so in terms of a brief history, NLP is built on the work of Milton Erickson, as well as some other researchers. It also has links to Jung, so Carl Jung, who's a famous psychologist. It's created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in California in the 1970s. What I found personally interesting, as many of you know who've watched this show before, I'm a big fan of TEDx and TED, which was also birthed in California, except it was a decade later in the 80s. So I find it really interesting that California, in a sense, is this hub of people who are interested in personal development. And perhaps it's because they've got money, they are wanting to be at their peak performance because they're in the entertainment industry or in that world. Perhaps it's because they have Silicon Valley and San Francisco and all of the amazing tech startups. So I'm just curious about what is happening in California, you know, what's so interesting there. And so there were links as well, you know, with hypnotherapy, Gestalt therapy. So if you don't know what Gestalt therapy is, Gestalt is a really important concept in NLP actually. So we do something called timeline resourcing, which is the registered term for the Tailored Life company that I've trained with. But you may also hear of things like timeline therapy or other versions of that phrasing. So timeline resourcing and Gestalt therapy is very much around the idea that you have had many instances in your life of significant events. And what will happen is you may have, you know, in your timeline, your life, different things that have happened, but there will be some things that are more significant than others. And the concept of Gestalt is that you can actually clear that whole Gestalt, that whole collection of memories or collection of thoughts around a particular negative emotion. It also can be a sense of actually, you might think that you have a particularly problematic time that you were struggling with, but it's going back to an earlier time than that you may or may not even be aware of. So there are some links there with quite a lot of other disciplines. In terms of other people who use NLP, people in our modern day culture, you know, our kind of popular culture that many people might have heard of, are Tony Robbins. He was, you know, really into NLP, and he saw, I believe it was both Bandler and Grinder as great mentors in his learning. We also have Paul McKenna, who is known as a, you know, a hypnotist, and he can control your mind. He's the man behind I Can Make You Thin, you know, I Can Make You Quit Smoking, I Can Make You Rich, those types of books. And then also Darren Brown, who's a magician and a you know, stage performer. And so there are lots of shows as well, which has made NLP popular. At the same time, it can also be quite negative because it can give a different perspective, which is more around the entertainment concepts of NLP. Okay, so some of the principles that I wanted to discuss around NLP. So I've tried to reference these where possible, and it also talks about some of the other bodies of work that are relevant to NLP. So ones that I didn't mention before, in addition to Erickson, are Bateson, Pearls, and Sater. These are all psychologists or people who've developed work in that area. So we talk about presuppositions of NLP. So these are some concepts that help to explain a little bit of the thinking and the methodology around NLP. Okay, so every behavior is potentially a communication. So what we do can be an indication of something that is underlying in our thoughts, in our physiology, in our behavior. So actually, as a therapist or as someone, a coach, you can gain a lot of knowledge by observing people's behavior. But also, we are not our behavior. So we are people, but we're not our behavior, which is a really interesting and important concept. In NLP, the mind and body are connected, and that might seem really silly because of course we know that, if you have a headache, you feel it, and you know that you have a headache and there's a nerve connection there. What I mean by the mind and body are connected is actually in NLP, what we talk about is there can be connections to specific things you may be struggling with. So you may hear about things like if you have a sore throat, well, is there something that you are struggling to say, to express, to communicate? If you're having a stomach pain, is there something you can't stomach? Is there something going on that just makes you feel sick? Could that be linked to shame or other things? Things like heart disease or heart problems, could that be a challenge that people are struggling with, where they have something on their heart? People talk about having broken hearts, and that can be really damaging because with NLP, we talk about saying it like you want it and saying it how it is. And if you say your heart's broken, then you're giving your unconscious mind an instruction that your heart should break. So there's so many things here which could be considered pseudoscience, or, it's quite a complex topic. So one of the key points there is that the mind and the body are connected, and so this is why we can give our bodies instructions and be mindful of what we say to our unconscious mind. Pearl, Sater, and Erickson believed that people have all of the resources they need to make changes. So we already have everything that we need inside us. And what my trainers, Mark and Nikki Taylor, shared was that actually we can, there are no unresourceful people, as we said, but there are unresourceful states. So what we can do is people get disconnected from themselves. They get disconnected from who they are and what they want, their goals, their values. And it's about rediscovering and reconnecting ourselves. Okay, so people orientate themselves by their internal maps, their model of the world, and not the world itself. So what that means is that we all have a way of seeing the world. We all see the world in different ways because we have a different viewpoint. We have a different model of the world. So one of the key things about NLP is if you are a coach and you're working with people, or if you are studying NLP, you learn that everyone's perspective is valid. And that can be quite hard as a concept to understand because sometimes people say things that are not cool and they're not okay. And we know that in 2022, cancel culture is a real thing. And so we worry about being cancelled. We worry about saying things that are going to polarize people in one way or another. However, the concept of people and their model of the world and respecting that is really important because you may not agree with somebody's choice and their lifestyle choices, their faith choices, what they wear or the language they use. But actually, if you're working with a client or even a colleague, then actually there is a real value in respecting somebody else's model of the world. So we talk about, Korzybski said, the map is not the territory. And what that means is that we might think that someone's struggling with a particular issue from the outside in, or even as ourselves, when we talk to ourselves, we might think, oh, I have this challenge because I have ADHD, for instance. And actually, that may not be the territory, that it might actually be much wider an issue than you even understand. But also we talk about the root cause. What is the root cause of an issue? And it's often completely different to what you think. Okay, so in NLP, we talk about people make the best choices that they can at the time. This is something that has helped me so much. So I've had various things, like many people growing up, relationships or friendships that haven't always gone well. And I've thought to myself, what did I do wrong? I don't understand. I really love this person. Why didn't they return that love? What was wrong with me? And actually what I've come to realize is we are all doing the best that we can with the resources that we have and the choices we have at the time. And that is quite a tricky concept to get your head around. So if you feel really uncomfortable about that, I felt uncomfortable with it at first too. But the idea is that we make decisions with the information we have today, but for some people, they never have the opportunity to work on things, to get therapy, to help themselves, to get an outside point of view of their situation. And so we're doing the best we can with what we've got. So if you are feeling stuck, if you're feeling upset, if your heart is hurting and you're feeling resentment to someone, try and think about it from their perspective. You know, what resources did they have at the time that they hurt you? Is there something else that's going on in their life, or perhaps in their childhood, or in the way they were raised, or in their model of the world, that actually they thought that they were doing everything fine, you know? And having that perspective gives you compassion for others, which is so helpful, because when we don't forgive people or have resentment, we're actually holding on to stuff that hurts us. And in NLP, we talk about the mind-body connection. So when you're carrying all this stuff that hasn't been resolved, it's just running all this negative emotions and negative energy through your whole body. So it's taking up really valuable space and energy that you could be using to help you be at your peak performance. So that's a really important concept, but I have to be honest, for me personally, it took a little bit of time, and I'm so grateful for that lesson because it helped me to practice compassion. So Satir also says that although people make the best choices at the time that are available to them, choice is better than no choice. So in NLP, we talk a lot about ecology. We talk about having a win-win situation. We want people to have the opportunity to have choice. And that's why, as a NLP coach, you always want to make sure that you actually encourage the client or your colleague or whoever you're coaching to have a choice and to feel that that is their choice. We also know from Satir's work that every behavior is generated by a positive intention. Again, this is something that really, I guess the word is triggered me when I first heard that concept. How can some of the things that have happened to me be done with a positive intention? But actually, our unconscious mind, its role is to protect us, to preserve us, to protect our memories, to look after us. So it could be that someone maybe has stolen from you, or that's just a simple example, but the positive intention for them at that time may have been that they needed to eat, or they needed to feed their family, or there was a circumstance or a context around that behavior. So it's a really useful concept. Okay, so the meaning of a communication is the response it elicits, not the intention of the communicator. Which is work by Erickson. So this is really interesting to think about. You know, sometimes we think we want to say something, we think we want to do something, but what is the response that we're giving or getting? We also talk about in NLP, there is no resistance, there is only a lack of rapport. So that means that if you are, for instance, in negotiation, which is a very commonly used form of NLP, or a way that people use NLP, that is really important, that if you have no rapport, you cannot use NLP effectively, because what you need to do is you need to build trust and build connection. And actually, if you want to communicate well, then you need to develop rapport. Often for people like police officers or prison guards, or you know, people in high-risk situations like negotiators, they need to be able to build rapport quickly. And so actually, that resistance that you may feel is a lack of rapport. And I've had to learn this as well as an NLP coach, to see when I'm working with some of my clients, if it feels like the techniques that I've been taught aren't working, it's actually a problem with me, not the client. It's something that I'm doing wrong. Perhaps I haven't connected with them enough to make them feel comfortable. So that's really important. If what you're doing isn't working, do something different. So this is a whole concept just around your life. If you are, many people quote Einstein on this. It's not confirmed whether actually Einstein said this, but if you are, practicing the same behavior and behavior again, that can be a term for insanity. So to grow, to adapt, to learn, to evolve, we need to change our behavior. We need to change our techniques and our theories and our practices. So if what you're doing isn't working, then try something new. And that's a key principle. There is also no failure, only feedback. That was a really helpful concept for me to learn, because I am a recovering perfectionist. I like everything to be perfect, but I also never give myself the time that I need to make things perfect. And I put ridiculous pressure on myself. Sometimes in the past, I've had one particular manager that I haven't ever forgotten said this. She was saying, why do you do the gold star when actually the bronze will do? So we can choose when we should have really perfect, valuable work. So for instance, I do a lot of content creation, audio and video. And what I've learned is that actually it's really high quality, and sometimes it's right as it is, so for instance, I filmed an audition tape the other day for something top secret I'm working on, and it was filmed on an iPhone, which is much less professionally filmed than what I would normally do. But because that's a particular area that I want to develop, my own film skills, I wanted to use that piece of footage. And so in that context, it was good enough. And, sometimes the bronze standard is fine, but in other cases where it is billable work and for clients, then that perfectionism is really helpful. So actually the concept of there is no failure, only feedback is really helpful. Imagine you're in an office, for anyone watching and listening who might be thinking, oh, well, what has this got to do with me? I don't really want to be a coach. I don't want to be a negotiator. Imagine you're in an office, and this technique really helped me. You are feeling frustrated because you feel like your colleagues don't like you, or your work isn't being appreciated. Maybe someone doesn't say hello to you. Some people get upset by that. I know I have in the past, if my boss doesn't recognize me when I walk down the corridor or say thank you. And actually, what we learn with that phrase of there is no failure, only feedback, is when you're hearing constructive criticism, when people are saying to you, actually, you could really, I loved what you did. I loved that piece of content. I loved that writing, that article you wrote. But this one area at the bottom needs to be tweaked. What often happens for us is we don't hear the positives. We just hear that one little negative bit. And then the rest of the day, we just think and think and think about that negative thing that was said. But actually, that's helpful. It's not a negative thing. It's feedback. So there is no failure, only feedback. And it's a really, really powerful concept. So the most flexible variable controls the system. This is Ashleigh's law of requisite variety. So this is why being flexible is really, really valuable if you are using NLP, if you are any part of your life. You want to build flexibility wherever possible. Functionality and flexibility are really helpful. And everything that a human being can do can be modeled. This is another viewpoint of Bandler, Grinder, Tozy and Matheson. So that's a key principle of NLP, is that it's modeling the behavior of excellence. So it's looking at people around you, looking at people that you look up to. In NLP, there is a belief that you can learn anything. You can learn to be the best speller. Even if you have dyslexia, you can learn spelling strategies. There is a belief that you can learn languages quickly. You can learn anything you want quickly. So if you look at things like Jim Quick, who talks about fast learning, and you know, a lot of the kind of personal development gurus or coaches that we follow, they will often have some background in NLP or things that we've learned. So there is that strong belief that anything can be modeled. However, there are some ethical concerns around that too. So I wanted to talk about the power of language. In the NLP, we talk about the principle of saying it like you want it. So this is something that's really important. So if you are saying all the time, I'd really like to be wealthy, but it's just never going to happen for me. Why would it happen for me? I'm me, and that doesn't happen to people like me. Now that is words that I've said to myself for years. And what I didn't realize is I might work really hard, you know, put in the hours at work, you know, try to diversify income streams and put activities, put a lot of time and effort into activities to make me wealthy. But then if I'm saying to myself, well, that just doesn't happen to me, or if my behavior is not aligned in action with what I'm saying, I'm not going to actually achieve that goal. So what are you doing in your life or saying where you want something, but actually you might be sabotaging yourself, you might be doing things that are not in congruence with what you're looking for? This is something that NLP learning and studying, I hadn't really explored and I didn't really understand. So saying it like you want it is important. So saying something like, I'm working towards my wealth, or I'm creating my wealth, or having a value attached with what that means to you, so that you have something to really inspire you towards that goal. So for me, that might be, I know that with more wealth, I will have a larger platform, and I can then use that platform to make a difference and help others. This is an important point. I actually, there's a tech influencer I really love to follow. His name's Dan Martell. He talks very often around personal development tips, productivity tips. And what's really inspiring to me is that he's a multimillionaire with loads of different businesses, but he has ADHD. And as someone with ADHD, I really admire that someone has been able to achieve so much and make, you know, actually get things done, because in the past I haven't always been able to do that with my own ADHD. So one of the things that Dan Martell talks about, and it relates to this idea of saying it like you want it, is also the impact we can have when we give to others, when we give to our church, our community. If you're struggling with the concept of wealth and wanting to, you know, save towards something, having a goal and a value and thinking about the impact you can make can really help you to shift that money mindset. Cause versus effect is a really important part of NLP here, but also relates to language. And that's about the concept of everything in your life right now you have created. Now, I'm putting a disclaimer on that. When I first heard that phrase, I was so upset. I was it really wobbled with my head. I was thinking, well, how can that be? When this horrible thing happened to me, or that horrible thing happened, how could I have asked for that? And that isn't what it's saying. It's saying, imagine right now you're the master of your own life. You're the master of your own destiny. Everything around you can change. You can recreate whatever you want. That is, I still find it quite a struggle, to be honest. I like to be honest and authentic, so I'll just put it out there. But if someone is born in dire poverty and has really challenging life circumstances, is that not such a ableist term or concept for us to have, or a privileged viewpoint to say that anyone can, you know, recreate the life of their dreams? I mean, for instance, I remember, I think it was Molly May, I may have the wrong name, but there was a guest on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, which I watch a lot, but who spoke about we all have the same 24 hours in the day, and she got absolutely slated for that because of the privilege she's grown up with. But actually, the idea that we can all change our reality and work towards something is useful. And so I think we can say that, but we have to be careful how we say that and what we how we make those kind of arguments. But take it on face value and just think about your own life right now. If you pressed pause and just got a piece of paper out and thought, okay, if I look at my life right now, where am I contributing to some of the challenges in my life? Where am I keeping myself stuck? One of the things that I had struggled with in the past was money, around overspending and impulsive spending. But actually, I was continually behaving in a way that was unhelpful. So what I started to do was spend more time being aligned in my actions towards my goals. So making a note of my spending, checking my balance every day, sending out more invoices, thinking of my time as money, thinking about where I spent my time, giving less away. And actually that's when I was able to turn my business around, from being a business that I was just giving everything away to actually being able to start making money. So if you consider that potentially controversial concept of cause and effect, where are you right now and what can you be doing to change your circumstances? This concept helps me so much because I have to be really honest with you. I'm freaking out, like many people are, about the cost of living, about gas increases, electricity, and I'm thinking, wow, I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills as a self-employed entrepreneur, but I know that there will always be a way because I can control my output and my attitude and the way that I deal with things. And so that really helps me to think about my circle of influence and control, back to Stephen Covey, who's another leader that I really admire. Okay, so some language things I just wanted to touch on. The word but. There is an idea that when someone says but, you actually don't remember anything that they said before but, because what happens is in your mind, it's like a rebuttal. You know that when someone says, I like your perspective, but you're just going to be thinking, well, they don't agree with me, so why should I even listen? So you just stop listening. But when you say and, you remember the before and the after. So if you said to someone, I like your perspective, and I wonder if we look at it a different way. That could be a way that you argue or you negotiate or you share your view, which might be different, but it's in a way that's more positive, and that can be really useful in debate, in negotiating, and just in your personal communication to communicate effectively. It can be really useful in an interview as well. Okay, another thing that I hear a lot of people say, and I'm so guilty of this, is the word just. I'm just a secretary. I'm just a receptionist. I'm just a woman. She's just a mom. These are some examples of what people say, and they use the word just, and all of those things, there is no just about them. They're completely amazing things. I remember when I was a secretary or receptionist, and I thought to myself, well, I can't go to that conference because I'm just a grade C. I was in an organization where we had grades with alphabetical letters, and to be a higher grade, that's the people who would go and network at these amazing conferences. But actually, I thought to myself, you know what, I'm just going to start buying tickets for these things and going to them. And it helped to catapult my career by just investing in myself in those ways. And I would say that just is a word I love to throw out in the dictionary. Another way that we use just is when we take advantage of people's time. I just want to ask you a quick question. I just want to pick your brains. Just do this one thing before you go home. Actually, those are really, really damaging words that, it completely undervalues someone's time and effort and expertise. So I'm working on using the word just less. I'm also learning a lot at the moment about neurodiversity because I've, 2 years ago discovered my own neurodivergence. And just is a word that is often used where it could be so much easier if we were able to advocate for ourselves. So please stop using just if you can, especially if you're managing teams and you just need something quick. Just remember they've already got so much on their plate. Sorry is another one. When we say sorry, oh, I'm so sorry I interrupted you, you can make very simple language shifts like, thank you for your patience, or here's the attachment. If you missed it off an email, it's simple things like that where rather than apologizing and giving your power away, we would say, you're able to actually just get things done in a way that feels safe and you're still, you know, in a space of assertion. Okay, another thing I hear people say all the time is, I'm so bad at this, I'm so fat, I'm so this, I'm so that, I'm so ugly. Why do we do this to ourselves? Our self-talk matters, and this is a really important thing that I've learned in NLP is if you say it like you want it, then it's super powerful. So, you know, but you also need to have that aligned action and aligned behavior. So if you say, you know, I want to feel great in a bikini in Spain, well, anyone can be great in a bikini. You've got a bikini body, whatever size you have. However, it's about an internal feeling, isn't it? So if you're eating donuts all the time, but you want to feel and look a certain way, you have to have aligned action. Another thing that I learned, which my practitioners taught me, my trainers, was around the word not bad. So when we say to someone, how are you today? It's so nice to see you. And they go, not bad. What happens is because of the negative there, not bad. What happens for people is they remember bad. So every time you see someone, you think, oh, it's them. And it actually drains your energy. So it's better to go, good, you know, well. You don't have to pretend that you're not okay. If you're having a tough time and you trust someone and you need to offload and you've got some stuff you want to talk about, do it. But saying not bad is really, you know, it's not that helpful to you. There's much easier ways to communicate. A simple thing as well, which is connected to that, is not a problem. So when you ask someone for help and then you say, you know, thank you, not a problem, it's better to say, my pleasure, or it was a joy, or, you know, sure thing, or whatever you want to say in response. But when you say not a problem, it actually makes them feel like it's a problem. So these are little tweaks that you might not be aware of, but they've really helped me. Okay, so some of the uses of NLP in business and sports. So to help you perform well, it's often used in the coaching industry, which is really useful. As we mentioned, it's used in negotiation, it's often used in politics, and it's used in the news. So when I first discovered NLP, particularly hypnotherapy and hypnotic language patterns, I was shocked to see so much language that was relevant to NLP that was being on the news just in front of me. So in the UK at the moment, we've got two you know, candidates going for Conservative Party leadership. And I've been fascinated watching their footage of their addresses or debates, because actually they have such so many consistent and regular examples of NLP. So look at people's language, especially in the media. It's also used by some counsellors and healing therapies. So it's being used more by the NHS, so the National Health Service in the UK and perhaps other areas around the world, particularly as an alternative therapy. But there is still some concerns around NLP and the ethics of it, the research and academic, you know, credibility of it, the science behind it. So this is something that I'm exploring at the moment. I wanted to talk a little bit about my motivations for studying NLP, because I know that a lot of people do actually learn these skills, but they don't tell people, which was really surprising to me, because A, they don't want to be seen as someone who's into pseudoscience, or maybe it's considered new age or something like that. Or also they don't want to be seen as manipulative, or they don't want people to know that they switched on to certain tactics. So I found it really interesting that some people keep it really private, that they've actually got these skills. So for me, my personal motivations for studying NLP was curiosity. I interviewed a wonderful coach and leader, particularly in public speaking and project management. Her name's Lisa Morrison. She's a fellow MBA alumna from Newcastle University Business School and someone I look up to. And she came on my podcast years ago and talked about NLP. And she was talking about a whole bunch of other things, but she was just talking about how it had helped her through some really difficult parts and times in her life. Similarly, one of my good friends has an autistic child, and there were certain challenges that he was struggling with. And when she used certain NLP techniques, it really helped him to reclaim his voice around certain topics and thoughts and thought patterns. So I was curious about NLP. I did a free kind of introduction course and really enjoyed it, and then wanted to do more. But my main reason for wanting to do it was because of grief. If you've watched the show before, you might have heard me share a little bit about my best friend who was murdered in 2009. And I was 20 years old at the time. I was studying a journalism degree in Leeds in the UK, and I really struggled with that. I didn't have the skills, as we say in NLP, we do the best we can with the resources we have at the time. So, you know, it was a really, really difficult time. And what I had found is every year, you know, it's just been the anniversary of all of this stuff that happened. It's always difficult at this particular time of the year, particularly, and I just felt that I was stuck in the past. I was living in the past. I was living in grief. I was living in what happened. And actually, it's been a long time now. You know, it's been over 13 years, and I'm still, or had still been feeling so upset and emotional and grief struck by it. So what I wanted to do for me was not just that issue, but several other issues as well, is explore the things that I felt were keeping me stuck, explore the traumatic instances in my life. And actually, that was a key thing for me wanting to face those things. So in NLP, we talk about your unconscious mind will protect you from anything it needs to protect you from. And so what it does is it actually suppresses memories that are too difficult and too painful for you to deal with. And then what happens is when you're ready and when you're able to, it will give you those memories again to process. So what happened for me is I thought I was doing great. I thought I was fine. And then when I did my MBA, a lot of things came up for me because I was at such a fast pace of an accelerated personal development that all of these things came up for me, and it really messed with my head quite a lot. And so it's that concept of getting the information that you need that you've been suppressing for so long. So actually for me, that was a huge help, having NLP, to work through some negative emotions that I'd been storing in my body, in my heart, in my mind. You know, I used to say all the time, my heart had been broken, I was devastated, things like that. But that is the instruction I was giving to myself and to my body. So it's really interesting when you start to explore the connection between language and the instructions we give to our unconscious mind, but also the instructions we give ourselves in terms of our goals and dreams. So another thing I wanted to do in terms of my motivations was to look at my unhelpful habits and labels. So when I was diagnosed with ADHD, attention hyperactivity disorder, that was a shock for me, but also a massive relief, because certain things that I've been finding challenging my whole life actually made sense. But then what I found was I started to catch other symptoms and bring them on that I had never had before. And so this is why I think support groups are great and they can be really, really helpful. But also we need to be careful about what we take on, the labels we take on, because I knew I'd always struggled with time. I knew that I was what we call Ashmania, you know, just whirling through and creating creative chaos everywhere. But that doesn't mean that that's okay. You know, if you are in a workplace and you want to be professional and you want to work well for your clients, there are times you need to actually tackle that behavior. It doesn't mean that I'm saying people with ADHD don't struggle. Absolutely, I'm recognizing that, and I am very fortunate and privileged to have had help and systems and support to start to put things in place. But I'm not perfect, and I still have certain challenges that I struggle with every day. But what I am saying is that it was wrong for me to go, okay, here's a label, great, I'm going to become everything to do with this label, and I'm not going to take any personal responsibility. So for me, it was really important to look at where I was behaving in ways that were unhelpful and unresourceful and not in alignment with my goals and actions. Okay, so for me, I also wanted to develop goals in terms of sales techniques. I wanted to be able to have conversations more effectively without feeling guilty about it. You know, a lot of great entrepreneurial leaders that I look up to talk about the service of selling, and to actually sell and to make the the request is actually giving people the opportunity to work for you or work with you. So I wanted to feel more confident in that area, and just as a communicator in general. But one of the main reasons I wanted to look at NLP is I wanted to be aware of manipulative tactics. That might seem like a little bit of a strange thing to say, but I think I know in the past I've been able to buy things so quickly or just trusted people so easily, and I've been gullible, and I just felt that I really wanted to protect myself and protect my heart. So being switched on to how people can manipulate you. So I did an NLP qualification. In fact, I did 8 qualifications. So I studied, and this is not a sales pitch, by the way, but if you are interested, speak to Mark and Nikki at Tailored Life Company and tell them Ash King sent you, and they'll look after you. But I studied my NLP qualifications with Mark and Nikki Taylor at the Tailored Life Company. So what I did is I did practitioner level, and then once I qualified with that, I moved on to master practitioner. So when you do NLP, it depends on who you're working with and the discipline that you do, but I thought I'd share this in case anyone's interested in thinking about it themselves. It's something that was kind of in my mind for a few years, but I wasn't sure if I'd made my mind up about it. So you will tend to do stuff around hypnotherapy, NLP, neurolinguistic programming, and some courses might do timeline therapies or timeline resourcing, in this case, which is the registered trademark. So it really depends on which course you do. So I'm now a qualified master practitioner in timeline resourcing, hypnotherapy, personal evolutionary coaching, and NLP plus. So that's been a wonderful thing to do. So on the screen, I've got a small group of some of the people I trained with. There was about 16 of us when we did master practitioner in Birmingham earlier in July. It was so wonderful to have the opportunity to be with people for 2 weeks intensely. It was a lot of work. There was a lot of long days and long nights and homework and tasking. But I actually feel that I came back a different person to what I left. And I also was able to clear a lot of negative emotions and beliefs around money, around my business, around me. And I've been so productive since coming back to work after my master practitioner breakthrough experience, that I've been really, sometimes I wake up and I think, wow, I get to do that today. Are you for real? So it is really exciting. So I think it's a really powerful tool. However, I do want to raise some ethical questions that I think there are around NLP, but also just where I am on my journey going forward now. So I should say as well, in terms of qualifications, there are further qualifications you can do. You can do NLP trainer and you can do master trainer. But for me right now, I've studied enough. I've worked really hard the last few years, and I want to actually give myself time to consolidate my learning. I think that's a key thing that we forget about when we're learning all the time. We need to have time for reflection too. So I just wanted to discuss very briefly some thoughts on the ethics of NLP. So cases like NXIVM, if you've heard anything about that, so there was a guy called Keith Raniere, and personal development cults. So Keith Raniere ran a personal excellence academy in Canada, I think it was, working with a lady called Nancy Saltzman, and various other people who were involved in that. It became a cult. There were certain parts of that organization that were really damaging. There's lots of interesting podcasts and documentaries on that. What they started to do was they started to have personal branding, where actually they branded some of their followers on their bodies, and they would take collateral photography that was inappropriate for blackmail purposes. That wasn't in the wider global work that they did. It was in a very small part of the organization called DOS. Now, Keith Raniere's been jailed actually for trafficking and exploitation of people and profiteering and a whole bunch of other things. But one of the things that played a part in NXIVM was NLP. So Nancy Saltzman, who was part of this case, actually was a very experienced NLP practitioner and could work with groups as a practitioner. So I think examples like that can really hurt the ideology of NLP. At the same time, I think it's very important that we are careful about who we trust and what we put our time and effort into, and anything that is going to take you away from your family and friends and give you such controlled, prescriptive rules for your life, I think should be considered very carefully. Another thing that I think is damaging around NLP is The Game, which is a book on how to pick up women by Neil Strauss. Now, on one hand, you know, it must be very challenging to actually have conversations with women if you're nervous about talking to women. And I also see that on the other side of things, you know, from a female perspective, we have books on how to get how to get a man, or how to do this, or how to do that. So I think it is important that we have books and resources where people can develop and feel able to do things in their lives. But there became a cult movement around The Game and how to pick up women, where men would have a competition in a game to see who they could how many people they could sleep with, or different activities they could do. And this is an example of where people are using NLP tactics in a way that is harmful. There is also some concern around NLP not having a registered body or banner above it. Discrepancies over intellectual property are the key, proponent of that. So when Banda and Grinder decided to part ways, they actually had some discrepancies over who came up with the ideas and who it belonged to. So NLP as a concept doesn't actually have any registration to a particular body. There are bodies now, like the different NLP boards and groups, where they're trying to bring this under control. I know my qualifications are registered with the American Board of Hypnotherapy, so that's a way that those are credited and protected. But I think for me, as someone who is a lifelong learner and very interested in academia and research, this is a bit of a red flag for me. So I'm going to be honest, I'm still researching around NLP. I love the tools and the techniques it's given me, and it's given me so much in my life that I'm grateful for, but I'm still curious and I'm learning and researching, and I think that's a really important way to do it. What I would say is, if you choose to study NLP, I loved my experience. I found it really helpful, and it's been genuinely life-changing for me. I would say work with licensed practitioners. So do your own research, look for people who model excellence. So if you are going to, work with someone and they're telling you how wonderful they are, and, what are their values, and are they a good match for you? And do they live a life that matches your values? And are they people you'd want to learn from? Do you trust them? Those are all questions I would ask. Also look at where they registered, how they learned, how much time have they spent learning those qualifications. Consider your own motives for studying NLP. So I know when we did our NLP course, we actually had to take some, we had to have a meeting and a briefing and have some conversations with our trainers to make sure that we had the right motives and ethics. And drivers for wanting to study NLP, and I think that's really important. I also think it's important to pay attention to language patterns on TV, the news, clean up your own stuff before you work with others, and be cautious as well with hypnotherapy and the opposite sex. So there is, if you look at the ethics and controversy around NLP and hypnotherapy in particular, there are concerns around some of the things that might have happened where people can't remember and they have time lapses. So this is particularly interesting at the moment, looking at Tony Robbins and certain language he's used, or that there are some concerns, or there's some stuff in the press at the moment around people being worried about things that he might have done. So I feel that for all of us, it's important to learn and study and educate yourself, and just keep questioning whatever you're doing. And so that's where I am right now. I've got all these wonderful new techniques and tools that I really find super valuable, but I'm also continuing to learn and look a little bit at the development of it and the history of it. And it's actually opened my eyes to a whole bunch of other things too. So for instance, my passion about TED. Is TED another cult? You know, is TED a form of NLP? What are we part of? And so I think that this is a really valuable way to just take information in, but instead of just deleting it and distorting it and generalizing, actually sit with it for a little bit and reflect. So that's me for today. It's a bit of a deep dive on NLP. I haven't gone into all of the depths of what I could have said. I'm not an NLP trainer or master trainer. So this is my thoughts and my perspectives as someone who's recently qualified as a master practitioner. I am practicing as a coach. I can see how NLP does change lives. For me, it's been really, really helpful. But as I say, it is important to make up your own mind, your own conclusions, and I encourage you to always be curious. Thank you so much.